Hello, and welcome back to Podcasting's Practice. I'm David. I'm here this week with Jamie.
All right.
James.
Hello.
Rob.
Hello.
And special guest, Ben.
Hi there.
And this week, it's Cops. It's another cultural committee on cops and cop shows, etc., where we are not going to talk about Justified.
Boo.
Yeah, we're not allowed to talk about good cop shows, apparently.
You can talk about middling cop shows that are good, just not Justified specifically, because we are going to do an episode on Justified. I've been swayed. We will finally talk about it on another episode.
Yeah, once a certain someone pulls his finger out and actually watches the fucking thing.
I'm on season 3 now. Leave me alone. Fucking hell.
It's just jealousy, David. You get to experience it all fresh, so...
I know, that's exactly it. Cop shows, propaganda, and all the other lovely little influential pieces of media that make you think cops good if you don't analyse them for more than a few seconds. So, I'm just going to throw it to Jamie.
They solve all the crimes, and there's no more criminals on the streets of Springfield or wherever.
Yes, but also no, because if you look at Midsummer, 3,000% of their population are actually murderers.
Is this where we do a smash cut to some upbeat, jaunty music and have like introductory, zany looking kind of antics on the YouTube version of this? Is that what we're going to do here?
No, because that sounds like effort.
Right, Jamie, you were the one that really wanted to do this, so why don't you start us off with some good old propaganda?
Yeah. Well, I think given that we're on day 2 of the DC Comics discourse right now as we record this, we should probably start by comparing like how Batman is basically the stand-in for all TV cops. Do you know what I mean? Okay. It's that whole thing where like crime is just out of control, and if you don't like maim the fuck out of like muggers, then like crime wins. Do you know what I mean?
Is this like Batman is the stand-in for all TV cops and a Punisher is the stand-in for all real-life cops? Is that how it works?
I mean, the Punisher's like largely the same thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, all like cops in the real life all like paint the Punisher skull on their cars because that's the sort of like level of delusion that they aspire to. You know what I mean? Where if they weren't the thin blue line that was like emptying 40 rounds into a guy who they just thought looked shifty, then like society would crumble and we'd all like, you know what I mean? Like in the world where we abolish cops, everywhere is crime and everyone is murderers.
As opposed to
that is true.
But as opposed to the reality whereby whenever the NYPD go on strike, crime goes down and things are more peaceful by a noticeable amount, like not a statistical aberration or jitter. So important to bear that in mind. It's almost as if the cops aren't really necessary.
The NYPD are just the fucking worst. Like, did you ever read that article a couple of years back about how none of them like know how guns work?
I think I caught it actually. This is the one where they did the follow up on how many hours of firearm training your average NYPD cop gets, and it's like in some cases effectively negative. They're that bad with it.
Yeah, I think so. The thing I remember is that like they basically accidentally shoot each other and the public so often that they've had a thing where like every so often they've gone, maybe we should make the guns like a little bit harder to fire so they stop accidentally like shooting themselves in the dick. And so now like the handgun they issue you at the NYPD requires some like insane amount of force to pull the trigger. And so
is this like a Fisher Price thing or something? Does it come with brightly coloured buttons on the side?
No, it's just a regular gun. They just keep like tightening up the spring on the trigger or whatever. So like it now requires so much force to pull the trigger that none of them can shoot straight. They always just take out bystanders whenever they like try to shoot someone because they just like have to put like their whole weight into the trigger pull. But
Is this the same pistol where the safety catch was removed from like the side of it and was actually put on the trigger?
Maybe.
I think it's the one of the latest Glocks or something like that, but there's like a second little bit at the bottom of the trigger which is the safety catch.
All right, yeah,
so
yeah. No,
it won't go off if you like drop it or something like that. But like if you get a fucking itchy trigger finger, like you will kill someone.
Yeah, Oh, I know
Which is
I know
like
the
all
thing you
cops.
mean, but there was an incredible story in that about a sergeant, I think, in the NYPD who he was at home at the weekend. He took his gun out to show his mate. His mate was around drinking, and he wanted to see his gun, so he took the gun out to show his mate. And in the course of them fucking around with the gun, they cocked it, and the guy didn't know how to decock it. So he wrapped a scarf around the hammer, and then had to just keep it like that until he got back into work on the Monday and asked a grown up to fucking disarm his fucking gun. And anyway, these are the people that cop shows try to make seem good. Do you know what I mean? You've never seen that you've never seen the fucking NCIS crew accidentally do you know what I mean? Oh fuck, I've cocked me Uzi. I'd better just keep it stick a pillow in it and just hold on to it until I get back to work and ask a fucking adult.
It's basically meaning that those two guys in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, the older ones that they all make fun of, that is basically your average NY cop, except more malevolent.
Yeah.
That is the real cop is more malevolent.
Yeah. Hitchcock and Scully.
Yeah, that's the ones.
Yeah, they are literally because that's the thing, all cop shows try to make it sort of glamorous while still they paint characters like that where they're just absolutely fucking complete meat wreckage, and they just they try to make it seem somehow cool and sort of tragic, but at the same time a cool kind of tragic. They're always oh, I gave the best 46 years of my life to this job, and all I've got to show for it is 7 divorces and an arse that cannot be wiped, or some shit like that. You know what I mean? It's and you're meant to go, all right, yeah, that guy seems awesome, you know?
Yeah, it's also great. You've got TV shows like Bosch, the Amazon Prime kind of original one, which I'll be full disclosure, I quite like, right? It's total dad TV, but it's competent at what it does.
Yeah.
And that show is, it's based on the books, which were basically the archetype for this, which is the cool cop who's former special forces kind of shit, who's now working a really tough beat, but, plays hard, but is ultimately fair and is out to get the bad guys kind of thing. And it's just they see themselves as these tier 1 operators, whereas the actual reality of it is Mr. Scarfhammer, as you've described.
Well, that's a slightly different thing, though. I feel that's something more of the last couple of years. Because tier 1 operator, that's that sort of special forces.
No, I think it's been around.
It used to be. If you look old stuff like NYPD Blue or stuff like that, that was much more just depressing and grimy, and people with trench coats on, sort of slogging about, solving crimes. But now it's much more whiz bang, and as you were saying about the Batman thing, now it's all amazing technology caves and that kind of shit.
Yeah.
Well, that shit really started. The Amazing Technology Caves really started with CSI, such that it is it's hard to explain that the show CSI, Crime Scene Investigators, has actually changed the justice system in the United States.
Yeah.
And changed it arguably for the better, with lots of fucking caveats to that, because now juries expect there to be this super tight evidence for everything, whereas previously the cops could just basically come in and go, yeah, he did it. Now the audiences and who are becoming juries are now well yes, but where's your latent fingerprints that you lifted from a discarded toaster 3 miles away, which led you to an online, they're looking for this kind of detail, kind of shit, and the cops don't have it because most of the time it's just kind of fabricated.
Yeah,
I cannot convict until I've seen at least 3 zooms and enhances.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, I've seen prosecutors complaining about that, and it's great. Do you know what I mean? I have to actually do my fucking job now. Thanks.
But is that sort of because at least that's sometimes how it feels to me, that there's much more of an emphasis on the confessional and the conversation. Now it's much more about, we got to hunt the clues and that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, it's all
you see
forensic.
what I mean? It used to be much more CSI is not CSI, which is Law and Order is still very much like that. But a lot of them are much more look at me, look at me doing whiz bang and trailing bloodshot shit, blood spray or whatever, rather than guys sitting in a room and chatting.
Yeah, there's a thing that's apparent in a lot of cop shows where there's a rule that if you get a confession, then nothing else matters. Do you know what I mean? If you like, do you know what I mean? If you like ran like a bunch of people over in your car while you were chasing the guy, or you like shot like a bus full of nuns with like a machine gun, or you like invaded Serbia, none of that matters as long as the guy confesses at the end. Then like it's perfectly fine. You know what I mean? Because you caught the guy.
There's also never anything about testimony being thrown out for coerced confession and all that kind of shit. Like, there was a really good... I encourage people to look this up on YouTube, genuinely. It's, again, I'm on Brooklyn Nine-Nine because I think that's the one that's actually the most insidious right now. But it's a lawyer sitting down and watching an episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine and going, right, I'm going to count all the violations of rights that occur in this cookie comedy episode, and I'm going to talk about what I expect would happen at trial as a result of this. And he just picks a random episode. He's like, now I want to stress, this is a random episode. It's not meant to be particularly egregious. We chose it completely at random, and I'll happily do it for any other random episode if there's any contest about this being, out of the ordinary or anything. And he goes through it, and it's some ridiculous figure like 34 violations of rights and due process. And he's like, okay, so if this ever went to trial, this person would get off scot-free because of the way the cops have behaved in this. Because they're like doing routine shit like holding people without charge for the express purpose of coming up with a charge and all this kind of shit.
Yeah.
And but that's portrayed to the public as just being kooky bants and antics, essentially. And like, this is the ideal of what the cops should be, supposedly, right?
Yeah.
Just
absolute
nuts
stuff. It's like that in every show. I can't remember if I can remember having this conversation with someone, and I don't know if it was on the pod or not, but there's an episode of the Hawaii Five-0 reboot.
Yeah, no, it wasn't on the pod, but I think we were talking about this one night while playing Valheim.
Right. Well, there's like that is just absolutely like turbo fash, that show. It's they get special.
I've never seen this.
They get special dispensation from the governor to be able to like suspend people's like constitutional rights. They can just do what they want. So they like arrest people and hold them without giving them a lawyer or like anything like that.
Wait, they just have a piece of paper that says these laws don't apply to you.
Yeah,
that's a thing we can do now.
Yeah, they just run a black. They just run a black site out of town hall. Like,
to be fair, given what we know of the Chicago PD, that's not far from the truth with some police departments.
Oh Christ, yeah.
Fuck.
I mean, that is. Here's the thing, though. Like, even with that Chicago PD story, who, for anyone doesn't, I mean, do you want to talk about it, Ben, or shall I tell it, or what?
I don't really know much about it beyond the fact that they're just a horribly violent police force with its own black site that they send people to. So.
Yeah, they had an actual fucking black site, as in people would be arrested, and then rather than being taken to the police station for processing, they'd be shipped to this mysterious facility that's off the books, where they'd be held for often days without the presence of a lawyer or any bullshit. Just like complete and utter crazy Guantanamo Bay kind of style levels of shit, including like there were allegations of serious like abuse in there, and I'll just leave it at that, which doesn't put it very far away. So, although... I mean, famously, governors don't supposedly have the right to suspend the Constitution theoretically. Like, again, art imitates life, and this isn't terribly far away from how actual cops have behaved.
Yeah. So anyway, they have like they just do what they want, and what's really funny though is they have, and it's not just Hawaii Five-0 where I've seen this, but they have like just an insane level of deference to organized crime. Like if they're just, it's like just an average day in like Hawaii, and some guy's like stolen a fucking, I shit you not, a suit of prototype Iron Man armor and is running amok with it. They're allowed to just like fucking do whatever. They get away with murder, right? You know what I mean? That guy's not seeing a fucking lawyer until he's like been in jail for like a week at the minimum. But then like they have to like question someone from the Yakuza or some shit. Then it's like, oh, we'd better get this guy a lawyer. And it's like, you know what I mean? Oh, you better tread carefully. Or like, you know what I mean? They just happily like drive a bulldozer through some guy's house if they think he's been cooking meth. But like, this guy like might have like cut a bunch of people's tongues out for the Chicago mob. It's like, oh, we'd better treat him softly. Do you know what I mean? Give him some respect. He's been around a long time, his old like tongue cutter Jack.
Cops are afraid of consequences.
Pretty much,
that part rings true, doesn't it?
So anyway, there's an episode where they get this guy who's like, he used to run the SWAT team in, might be Chicago actually, and he comes to Hawaii to run their SWAT team, and then they recruit him into 5-0, and then
Sorry, just for my understanding, 5-0 is the reference to the people who can just extrajudicially murder someone because the governor says so.
Yeah, they're actually called like they actually call the unit 5-0.
Okay.
Yeah,
of course.
Like the original, the original. I think they're just cops, and it's just called Hawaii 5-0 because they're the 50th state. That's my understanding of it. Like as I barely remember having seen any of it as a kid. Like, but in the remake, they're explicitly called 5-0, and they can murder people like for fun. So anyway, the guy like from Chicago is on 5-0, and his friend and his wife come out to visit, and they go for a hike, and then the guy's wife like falls to her death. And the guy like the guy on 5-0 just instantly assumes the bloke must have pushed her. And so he spends the whole episode like trying to prove it, and he can't prove it, and the guy has to go back, like he has to let him go, and he goes back to Chicago. And then like sometime later they have an episode where that guy comes home in Chicago to find like his like former friend waiting for him, and he abducts him, and he abducts his like new girlfriend, and he holds them like prisoner. And he, like, do you know what I mean? Tries to torture the guy for, like, evidence that he killed his wife. And then eventually just, like, loses it and starts smashing up the guy's house. And, like, eventually, like, he just puts a wall through and finds it stuffed with, like, money. And then, like, the episode ends with him, like, finding this, like, pile of money hidden in the walls. And you think, all right, okay, so he's, like, clearly lost it there, and there's going to be some sort of consequence. Oh, no, it's just never mentioned again. It's just considered good police work. You know what I mean? You abducted a guy. You abducted, like, an innocent woman who just happened to know the guy, and you, like, held them, and you, like, did a bunch of fucking, like, criminal damage and torture and shit, but you found some money in the walls, so good job.
But this is one cop like beating the snot out of another cop and his girlfriend, right?
I think they're both one guy. The thing is, though, this is in Chicago as well. This isn't in like Hawaii where he's got covered. Like he's ostensibly got like a note from the governor saying he's allowed to do this shit. Do you know what I mean? He's just like fucking bullying a cop in a different jurisdiction, and it's like it's just.
I just like to imagine it's like, it's all right. My boss will call your boss. And there's like a call between governors that takes place in this shit. Yeah. Just ridiculous.
They're gonna like do an exchange thing where they let one guy from Chicago come over and like totally fuck up like a Coast Guard's house or something. But yeah, it's just wild. Just like, oh, he got it. You know what I mean? He found the money. It's like, okay, does the money prove that he killed his wife? What the fuck? Like, do you know what I mean? It's just, nope, that's it. It's a happy ending. You found money in the wall.
I'm convinced that art is degrading over time because this has its precedent, or its antecedent, I should say, in the show The Shield, right? Which is a which set in the 2000s in Los Angeles, and it is following a group of cops called the Strike Team. Now, this is actually based on a real thing that existed, right? There was a strike team-like group of elite cops
it was called Rampart. It was called Rampart.
Yeah, and they were pulled together and they were given basically free jurisdiction to go fuck up the streets, essentially. As long as they were on top of like serious violent and gang criminal activity, then, you know, they were given carte blanche. And wouldn't you know it, it turned out they were all crooked as shit and got up to some really nasty stuff, including basically running drugs themselves.
Imagine my absolute shock at that development.
Yeah, I seem to remember they acted like you know the paramilitary death squads they have down in some Latin American states. They had pretty much that kind of thing going on, didn't they? They even had like bags of like guns stolen from evidence that they would then plant on people after killing them. Quite premeditated.
Yeah, no, they were. I mean, this shouldn't come as a surprise to those of us who know a little bit about the background history of police. Again, I'm going to drop another plug. There is a podcast called Behind the Bastards. They did a short series called Behind the Police, which is about the origins of the police in the United States, and a little bit in the UK too, actually. And it goes into the history. And wouldn't you know it that the earliest police organisations were basically hand in glove with criminal organisations right from the beginning? Because they were paid to solve crimes, and therefore, if you linked up with the person who was going to start and do the crime, then basically you could go to people and say, hey, listen, I'll solve the crime and do asset recovery for you, and then cut in the criminal so that it's coming and going, you get a paycheck, essentially. And that was like a large part of the origin of the police. And so funnily enough, when you take all the the oversights which have been grafted onto this over time to try and stop that shit being totally blatant, they just revert back to factory default settings and go about doing that shit. Wild. Crazy. But yeah, good listen for those who want a little bit of background. So, like, The Shield essentially is a dramatization of this, right? It's a fun kind of jolly romp, so to speak. And it's one of these, like, it's very early 2000s TV because it's very much like, oh, look at these bad guys who are doing bad fucking things, and aren't they so fucking cool? But don't worry, they will get their comeuppance one day towards the end of the series. But for now, you get to root for them winning as they do these terrible bad things. And wouldn't it be good if you, like, you know, if police really could do these terrible fucking bad things? And what that shows is the entire premise of the show is they are doing dirt and having to they're running around covering it up, essentially. That's the show. The show is like, well, this person has rights, and if you violate it, then that's going to go bad with the prosecutor and the DA's office, etc., because they won't be able to, you know, withstand the lawyers' inquiries on it and that kind of stuff. And so there's like an interesting tension, and they still do it fairly unrealistically, but at least there's like a fucking lip service video of like constitution, due process, that kind of shit, right? In fact, it's a pretty big deal in one of the episodes where, you know, they need to find a girl who's been abducted by a paedophile, and ticking time bomb scenario.
That's like the first or second episode.
Yeah, it kind of is. They let the vicious bad cop essentially in the room alone with the paedophile, and the camera's turned off, and he beats him with a phone book and various other implements until he gets the location of the girl, right? And like that right there, that whole ticking time bomb thing is like the setup to it. That is kind of a show. It's like, look, this person's doing terrible things, and don't worry, you can be certain as the show goes on, their life will fall apart, and ultimately they'll be karmically punished for this. But aren't they so fucking cool? And aren't you so glad that people like this exist to deal with the real dangers of society? And so that's the 2000s. Smash cut to Hawaii Five-0 reboot, and they've just dispensed with all of the checks and balances, like even nodding to it. And it's like, oh yeah, no, we got a pink slip from a governor that says essentially we're off the clock and we can do whatever the fuck we want, and we can do our own black sites and shit. It's just like art is devolving over time.
Yeah,
I'm convinced of this, especially when it comes to police narratives. Funny that
cops hate oversight, like, but like triply so in TV shows. Before we go on, though, you just reminded me of one actual like realistic thing I saw on a cop show, and I can't remember the name of the show. It was Netflix. It was a Netflix original, and it had that guy. I believe he was in the American Office, and he played. Oh fucking hell! He was in the Star Trek Discovery. He played Harry. What's his name? Was it Harry?
Fucking Dwight. Dwight for the Office.
Aye, him.
Rainn Wilson.
Yeah, he was in a cop show on like that Netflix made, where he was a cop, and he'd had like a heart attack, and then he like bribed his doctor to get him back on the force or some shit. And he's like, he just drinks too much, and he smokes, and he like, you know what I mean? It was fucking dog shit, like. But in the first episode, there was a bit where they'd like arrested someone, and he as much as tells the guy that they're gonna fucking like fit him up for the crime, and the guy says, "Oh, like no, I can tell you what really happened," and he says, "I don't care what really happened. I just need to clear the fucking like case." Do you know what I mean? So if, like if I can pin it on you, that's enough. And
that's definitely really realistic, because like one thing I did actually read for this is Homicide, a Year on the Killing Streets, or whatever it's called, by David Simon.
And one of the Homicide Life on the Streets. It's excellent.
Yeah, and like one of the things he says is that the clearance rate is God as far as like detective work goes. You clear cases, that's what it's all about. It doesn't really matter if you're doing any kind of justice.
Yeah.
There are like, I think we'll talk more about this at the end of the episode, but there are like two shows which sort of give a not complete bullshit view of policing in the States, and in the UK, I should say. But I think we might want to save that for the end rather than get into it now.
Aye. So the thing I was going to bring up was like cops hate oversight, and it's never more apparent than whenever a cop show involves internal affairs.
Oh yeah.
They're just treated like absolute fucking demons that have been like summoned to just cause problems on purpose. It is never not funny. And it's
yeah.
so,
I mean, I haven't watched it, but I thought that like Line of Duty was like the opposite to this rule. I thought they were supposed to be the good guys rooting out crims.
The thing about Line of Duty though is that they seem to live in like a really bizarre universe where the entire police force is like corrupt in a really egregious way instead of like I don't know how to really describe it, but like it's an incredibly cynical world that they seem to live in, even worse than this one somehow.
Yeah.
It's like your average cop is corrupt a little bit, but they're corrupt in ways that they don't consider corrupt for the most part. It's very weird. They basically have different standards on this shit, whereby, occasional little favours or not really giving people their due process in quite the right ways and stuff is stuff that's kind of like turned a blind eye to and is fine. But they draw the line at shit like, actually taking backhanders from like drug dealers and things like that. And so it's very, very strange. The reason they hate the likes of internal affairs, or, the complaints as they're called in Scotland at least, is because they come in and they apply the rules as they're actually written on paper. And so the little kind of shit just doesn't... And so the cops think they're being incredibly unfair. Like, but I'm allowed to get like free fish and chips from this shop as long as I turn up on time whenever there's like a complaint or something. That's not corruption. That's just a perk of the job kind of shit.
Okay. So in order for it to count as corruption, you actually like have to get a brown paper bag full of unmarked bills or something, and otherwise it's just fine.
Yeah, it's like from their perspective, it's basically if they're actually cutting deals with real criminals. And there's a caveat to that too, because they'll cut deals with criminals to bag bigger criminals, sort of thing. So, like, having an informant off the books and stuff like that is something that a lot of cops will just kind of do, and they'll put up with, and they'll cut them slack. It's like, they've got, like in Edinburgh at least, I knew at least one police officer who, like, was a family member of a friend, and they got talking one night about their experiences, and like, this... I have someone I talked to who I could never make an actual kind of proper informant or anything like that, but he was a junkie, and the way it worked is whenever he got caught shoplifting or something similar, then, I got word that they'd tell me that he was in, and I'd come in and go, right, what you got for me? And he'd give me information and I'd cut him loose, basically. And that's not corruption or anything as far as they're concerned. That's not like, even though it's technically off the books, and even though it involves letting someone get away with crimes and giving them a free pass to do it, from their perspective, it's like, that's the okay kind. Whereas if you're actually cutting deals with drug dealers or things like that, it's the bad kind.
See, when you mentioned free fish and chips there, I immediately thought of the Quality Police sketch in Burniston.
Yeah,
you've got to protect your scran.
The only thing I remember seeing when it was like a big police corruption and the internal affairs were involved thing was Ashes to Ashes, where the guy in charge of the internal affairs internal affairs was literally Satan.
Yeah, yeah.
thing I love about Ashes to Ashes and Life on Mars and that is it's a lot like those Facebook groups that like remember when the bin man was hard, but for cops.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah.
It's annoying. Like I want to enjoy that, but I just kind of can't at the same time. Some of it's good and some of it's absolutely fucking dog shit.
Yeah, it's very hard once your third eye is opened on this shit. And apologies, listener, if this is happening to you as you're, listening to this episode and it kind of goes on. But once your third eye is open, it's really hard to watch this kind of shit and not just be sitting there going, I can't believe this is bullshit. Especially when you're with audiences who are just like, yeah, cool, beat the shit out that guy, that's awesome. And, it's a weird kind of feeling like you are on an alien planet almost at times as this shit goes on.
Yeah, I've been watching a lot of cop shows and related shit with my mum during lockdown. And, she's just like savagely reactionary when it comes to do you know what I mean? Constantly like yelling, shoot them at like the fucking, the people in like Criminal Minds or whatever because they're chasing someone rather than just fucking murdering them.
I will say, like, the perfect antidote to this though is the Red Riding films. If you watch all three of them, you'll just be completely ACAB overnight.
I've not actually seen them. Who are they by?
They're by like three different directors or something, but they're based on the books by David Peace, and there's probably the only kind of like cop media I've seen that takes like a properly hostile and critical stance on police, like more so than The Wire or anything like that. They fucking hate the police and that.
Sounds
great. I'm adding that to watch list.
Yeah, sounds very up my street.
The Wire's one of those ones that's always fucking held up to me. Like, I've never actually sat down and watched that fucking series because so many people have told me to, and I just kind of almost don't want to do it because of it.
Yeah, hard same. I'm
Oh
being
man,
snotty on
that
purpose.
honestly, that just sounds childish. I can't believe people would behave like that.
That's not in your character at all, Jamie. So this will come as zero surprise to anyone who listens to the pod, but I'm a big Wire person, right? I have watched The Wire multiple times, and it's one of those shows I put on in the background if I'm working on a project, just for background noise. In my defense, I 100% agree with you guys. I think the people who recommend it all the time and are so up their own arses about it are the most unbearable fuckers on the face of the earth and tend to be incredible libs at the same time.
However, you're about to prove you're the exception to the rule, is that right?
No, not quite. Like, my thing about The Wire is I genuinely like the writing. I like the characters, and I think it's fun. Like, it's as simple as that. I don't think it's an accurate and groundbreaking depiction of our society sort of thing in a way that it gets held up to be. It's a good one. I think it does count as literature, but like, you know, that's saying very little, essentially. It is an incredibly liberal worldview that says things can't change and no such thing as solidarity exists and you can't really do organisation. And it's like it's a doom-pilled libs view of life's just going to get shittier, the system will continue to grind on, the only hope and goodness you can get is from connection to your fellow human beings. And it's like, that's it. That's the entire extent of The Wire's politics, essentially. It's that liberal thing of pointing out all the problems, of then going, but we can't actually fix anything, right? The sole redeeming feature of it is that it's very fun, and the characters are incredibly well written and very flawed in places, and it's a genuinely good drama. Like, genuinely good. It's fun to watch. But its depiction of the cops is more real than most depictions on TV. I still don't think that means it's actually real, right? Because remember, one of the writers was a cop. So, you know, he's not going to put the really dark shit or the things that he's not comfortable associating with himself. That's not really going to make it into the TV show. They still do have plenty of like negative shit about how the cops behave, and he goes in very hard against the war on drugs. And that's the whole premise of the show. Is basically America is fucked up by the war on drugs, and here is why. Essentially. And it does a good job of portraying that. But it also soft pedals just the absolute insane shit that police can get up to. And instead just focuses on like the petty stuff, like, you know, beating down suspects, you know, and extracting confessions under duress. And it does all that kind of shit, but it doesn't kind of quite touch the corruption angle or all that kind of stuff. It pretends that more or less doesn't really happen so much. And when it does happen, it's like... you know, it's all to do with lawyers of drug dealers, essentially. It's very interesting when you watch it knowing a cop wrote this. It changes your perspective on it. So I would recommend, but here's the thing, for all that it is critical of the cops, it does that kind of apologetic thing of saying, and the reason the cops suck is because of the war on drugs, which is not true. The war on drugs has made it worse, but cops themselves suck for different reasons than that, and the show just doesn't even go there. Yeah. So there you go. There's my 10 pence on The Wire.
Can we in sort of on this tangent, what I always find fascinating, and which always sort of drives me mad when I'm watching any kind of court procedural, especially if there's any kind of interrogation, is that for some mad reason, like I would say 90% of the time, there's no lawyer present for the criminal or something. It's just like, no, they're just going to walk in there and just like be cool and be criminals. Yeah. And I'm just like, you know,
they actively try to portray the idea that only guilty people ask for a lawyer.
Yeah, no, they absolutely do. One of the reasons that Wire gets a lot of praise from people is because they actually touch on this shit all the time, which is, you know, they're straight up saying, like, the cops are talking to each other and they're explaining to a new junior detective and like, listen, don't, like, avoid them getting a lawyer. Get them talking without a lawyer. If a lawyer walks in, it's over, essentially. And you can do pretty much anything you want to avoid them calling for a lawyer. And a lot of the criminals, you know, they're portrayed very much in a sense of, like, there's one guy gets talking in a meeting before the lawyer shows up. The lawyer comes in and immediately shuts everything down, smacks the criminal in the back of the head and says, "You fucking idiot," basically, and drags him out. And it's very much portrayed as, like, the lawyers are the villains, essentially. It's very, very strange. Yeah. It's like the whole idea that giving someone criminal representation is a form of evil. Now, there's like a little tiny gem of truth to this, in that you do get criminal lawyers, like actual lawyers who are involved in basically helping the criminal enterprises do all their legal bullshit.
That bit from fucking Breaking Bad about you don't need a criminal attorney, you need a criminal attorney.
Criminal attorney, yeah. Like it is a real thing. Like shady lawyers who help criminals launder their cash and do all other shit is like totally a thing, but it's not as fucking universal as these shows all make it out.
Yeah.
And actually, most of the time, you want a criminal to have effective representation because then you can say basically, look, we found them guilty despite the best efforts of someone to prove them innocent, essentially. Or to maintain their innocence, I should say. But from the police's view, it's like, no, if lawyers are bad news, you want nothing to do with them. All you want to do is get a confession, or failing that, to get a story that tells the jury why they did it, essentially. And lawyers get in the way of doing that. And it's total garbage. And most cop shows, they recognise that the drama gets sucked out of the room when the lawyer comes in and goes, okay, no talking.
I was going to say, I mean, it is just fantastically dull if half your episode is just, a lawyer going, he's not answering that, he's not answering that, next question, he's not answering that.
Anytime I can think back to like when I was younger and like the bill was on or something, and I'm thinking to like any time it was set in an interview room, there was always this like, it's either boringly depressive or depressively boring atmosphere in the room when questions are being asked because there's a lawyer there.
Mm-hmm. The bill
and it's just
is
it doesn't fucking stand up to any sort of entertainment at all.
The bill was such a weird show. I mean, not so much later on, I gather. But when I was a kid, it was so weird because it did something that I don't think I've ever seen, very rarely seen in other shows, where you literally never saw anything happen unless a cop was present. It never showed so that they would turn up to or someone's reported like a fucking crime and they would turn up and you knew as much as they did. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't like fucking they didn't show you the crime so you knew that guy was lying or whatever. You the cops just you had all the information that the cops had. They didn't really do anything fucking interesting with it. Do you know what I mean? As a device, but it was weird that they sort of stuck religiously to it. I remember noticing that as a kid that that was how the show was set up, and then it was just it was crushingly dull. They didn't do anything interesting with it, and it was just here's how the police operate, down to insanely boring levels of minutia and stuff like that. You know what I mean? I know
now we watch our main characters do paperwork for 2 hours.
I know from
Bill's kind of
sorry, go on.
Bill's kind of weird because it stands apart from other police procedurals because it doesn't seem to have the usual cop show format. It seems to be more like Casualty but with cops or something like that.
Do you know the thing about the bill is it's effective propaganda for its time, right? And I'll unpack this one a little for people. At the time, the overtone window was not quite as far fucking hard right fash as it is these days, and so your public wouldn't really accept a lot of stuff on the TV that was too abrasive, too violent, too fascist in depicting the cops. And they certainly wouldn't want anything that's too realistic. So what do you do if the public is not as reactionary as you want them to be? But if you portray what's actually happening, they'll still be upset. Where do you draw the line? And I'm going to fucking quote from The Wire. Why not? There's a bit where two drug dealers talking to each other, and one tells the other, keep it dead fucking boring, right? Because he says, you know what kills more cops than donuts? Boredom. And that is what the bill is. It's basically going, oh, look, see, you want to know what the police are like, here's what the cops are like. They're just boring. Nothing to see here. It's just fucking boring. And that's it. Essentially, that is what the bill exists to do, is to bore the audience into going, oh, there's nothing really to care about here, and to get them to be apathetic rather than engaged, active supporters of hoorah the cops sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it definitely got more sensationalist and hyperactive as it went on, but
and that's because society lurched further to the right, I'd say.
Well, maybe, but yeah, when I was a kid, it was just so fucking dull. Do you know? My mum used to watch it religiously. And it was you'd learn all these weird things like theft by finding is a crime. Do you know what I mean? I can remember learning that because someone found something on the street and the police were like, "No, that's still theft, mate." And it's all right.
Yeah. See, I grew up. So I mean, as you know, I didn't grow up in the UK. So in Holland, the big thing at the time was German 1980s, early 90s cop dramas, and they were also just crashingly boring. Like, they would have these incredibly slow conversations with each other and the suspect, and you just, after 20 minutes, you'd just be sitting there and going, is there anything ever going to happen? Plus, they all had to wear leather jackets, and a lot of them had moustaches. I know my mum was addicted to them for a while, and I could never work out what it is she actually saw.
Sorry,
Yeah.
is this
Until now.
is this actually like cop shows from Germany you were watching, or were you watching like the wind up to the start of German pornographic films?
No, I swear to Christ, this is actually this was actually the whole format of the thing.
It
You get the
feels
criminal
like
in the
that-
interrogation room, and then the funk just cuts in.
No, it's
sounds a bit like,
Germany. It'd be techno, surely.
It sounds a bit like it's got the kind of like proto vibes of like the kind of Scandi crime drama type thing, but like just done shit and in the 90s.
Yeah.
No, it was just incredibly dull. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I was a youngin' at the time, so maybe I just had the attention span of a small child. But
Yeah, maybe they're good actually, but who knows now?
Yeah. Let's not talk about what was on Dutch TV in the 90s or whatever. We almost fucking murdered an episode last time, didn't we? So.
Speaking of Scandinavian dramas, though, I did thoroughly enjoy The Bridge, and found that quite interesting from like a copganda kind of perspective, because that was copganda across two countries essentially, and it was successful enough that a whole bunch of other countries were like, yes, we should imitate this shit, leading to The Channel as an actual fucking program that was produced between. Yeah, they made a version of The Bridge, but it was the Channel Tunnel, right?
Oh,
it's exactly as fucking awful as you imagine it would
I think
be.
that was still called The Bridge.
No,
though.
it was called The Tunnel.
Yeah, it
How
was
do
called
you
The
even
Tunnel.
get murdered in the channel? What the fuck?
No, I mean, they fucking contorted themselves, and there was an American version between America and Mexico, right? And to give credit, like, there are some good story beats in it. It's like cops from two different countries with two different systems have to work together to solve an international drama, but there's more going on than you expect. Like, it's good thriller stuff, and like, what's not to enjoy? And the original The Bridge is excellent, and I enjoy it as a drama, but by God, the copganda bit of it is equally kind of fucking there. Just disassemble that one of the main characters in The Bridge, in fact, the main character, has Asperger's, and like, she's functioning, but she's got pretty high and effective Asperger's, and doesn't see a problem in changing in front of people and all this kind of shit. And that's portrayed as being totally fine and not something the cops would, notoriously, what I'm saying is the cops are well known to be very accepting of diversity and sensitive towards the particular mental health and other special needs of individuals. And that's the sort of shit where like it just slides in under the radar, going, look, this is fine. Cops are totally okay with this kind of shit, and people don't pay attention to it because it's background noise.
Yeah, the Tunnel was absolute pish. Like it's Stannis Baratheon, and that lass from In Bruges together at last. And like the
one combination you always waited
yeah,
for.
they like some of the crimes in UK and some of the crimes in France, and then at the end, like the guy's family all get kidnapped and like held in a theme park or some shit. I wasn't really paying attention by that point, I'll be honest.
Like the original Bridge has a pretty decent thriller plot, and what they basically did for all the remakes they did, including like the American one, etc., is they just fucking ripped it off, but tried to work out, well, what's the minimum we can change to make this fit in the current surroundings we've got. And so in America, there's all about kind of smuggling tunnels across the border to Mexico and all this kind of shit. And in UK, it's like haunted theme park. That's where the killer's going to take the family. And it's like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna get we're gonna get like fucking DMs on Twitter where people explain it wasn't actually a theme park, and you know what I mean? Like, who let this fucking idiot on the podcast?
Who was the killer in the tunnel? Was it the Joker or something?
It's it was actually it was a guy that been in stuff. I did recognize him when he turned up. I want to say it might have been Dexter's brother. From the first season of Dexter.
What was the background behind this guy? How was he getting his victims? Did he run the waltzers at the fair or something?
Oh no, he had some grand overarching scheme that he had to require to involve both countries' police forces and all this sort of shit. It was
Again, the Bridges version of these plots are pretty good because they're actually written by someone in the countries that they kind of apply to, and so it's like grounded in that way. But when you start getting to like the American versions and stuff, it's just like they really are contorted. So like, look, this has worked and it has sold, but rather than repackage the original thing, for a new audience to view with subtitles or anything, we won't do that. Instead, we will try and make the minimal changes we can, and in times the plot just gets very, very strained. I haven't watched The Tunnel. I have watched the American version of The Bridge. I turned off around about episode 3 where I'm like, this is just bullshit. I can't deal with this shit anymore because I'm watching the parallel plot points and it just doesn't work at all.
Maybe it's better with a SWAT team shootout at Crinkly Bottom at the end. Like, who knows?
Talking about the American versions of stuff.
I'm sorry. I can't stop thinking about what future cop episodes are going to be set in the haunted remains of the woods. And I think
my brain was there as well, Rob. I was trying not to, but
So speaking of American remakes of stuff. And it ties into your point there about the police being famously open to diversity and stuff. Mm-hmm. The difference between the British and American versions of Life on Mars are fucking incredible. The British version, Sam is he called Sam?
Yeah.
He's basically, as you would expect if you got hit by a car and woke up in the 70s, he's not having a good time with it, you know what I mean? And he's constantly on the verge of a breakdown. And the other cops, like especially the fucking one who's like a knobhead, like just constantly are aghast at like his fucking like outbursts and stuff. And they're joking about him as be like, and then they stop laughing when he comes into the room, and they're just generally dicks about like his mental health problems. And in the there's a bit where in the first episode where a suspect has a gun, and he basically tries to goad the guy into shooting him because he thinks that might like wake him up back in his normal life. And in the British version, everyone like treats this largely how you would like react if you saw like someone you work with like trying to get shot. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. In the American version, the same thing happens, and everyone's just like, "Oh, this guy's fucking crazy. He'll fit right in." Do you know what I mean? And it was, it was fucking amazing. Like, there's a scene in the first episode where they're questioning like an old lady. She lived next. She submitted a noise complaint about a neighbor or something, and Sam thinks that the neighbor might be the murderer they're looking for. And that he's trying to interrogate this old woman, and she's just like getting flustered and everything. And then like Gene comes in and offers her like a biscuit with and a cup of tea, and just like wins her over with his down to earth, like, you know what I mean, old timey racism or whatever. In the American version, they have that scene, and obviously like it's Harvey Keitel that's like offering her the biscuit and the cup of tea, and just the impression you get is that he is definitely trying to fuck her. It's just like, do you know what I mean? There's no other way to read it as far as I was concerned. It's like
Harvey Keitel, MILF.
Yeah, Harvey Keitel is absolutely going to like go to town on that.
Just dressed exactly like he is in Taxi Driver.
Oh, Christ.
Fucking hate an American remake.
This is the thing though, like, the reason they remake this shit is simply because there's propaganda value in it. I'm really convinced of this. We kind of look at it and go, here's a story or riff or a beat we can kind of rip off and we can repurpose and use to package our own thing. Because, like, if they just transmitted the original one with, like, subtitles or even not subtitles for American to, British, etc., it wouldn't have the same resonance. It wouldn't fit, because part of what makes it work is that it's your own culture that's been reflected in it, essentially. And it works going from America to the UK, because Brooklyn Nine-Nine is fucking popular over here, for example, because we're so fucking exposed to American culture that it's practically a background culture to our own, essentially. But it doesn't work the other way around at all. And so they happily do all these adaptations because they're like, well, we want the propaganda value, and for that to work, it has to resonate. So I guess we're just going to have to do this, essentially. And you can often tell by what they don't fucking adapt and what they don't crossover, etc., what the actual function of these things kind of is. Like, you occasionally catch like shows with good stuff that's like quite representative, about police and other stuff, and which are compelling and good dramas, strangely, those never really seem to get adapted or really picked up or really remade, you know? And it's always just the stuff which paints the cops in a good light, or incidentally paints them in it's complicated light. Because there's another a fucking beat of these shows where they admit that the cops are bad ones, but they just kind of say, oh, I mean, they may be bad ones, but it's complicated, and that makes it okay.
Yeah.
Happens all the fucking time. Something
you kind of see with the Scandi crime dramas, like the original ones, they all kind of have a lot of them have kind of socked in politics. In particular, like stuff like Wallander has very kind of socked in politics going on, and so like one of the culprits is always kind of society, you know, how we should make things better and all that. But then when it gets translated to say over here, all that just kind of gets shed. So I can see what you're talking about.
It's very explicit in more modern materials, and this is cop adjacent, but I'm gonna stick a flag to this and say it should not be controversial to describe the Drug Enforcement Administration as being cops, right? I think that's fair.
Yeah.
So Netflix's series Narcos, which I like and I enjoy, but I recognise that it's total trash. Its very first episode is all about it's complicated, right? Where it opens with a DEA agent phoning local police and giving them the location that like a cartel hitman's going to be, knowing full well the police are going to turn up and gun down the entire nightclub that he's at, basically, just to get him, right? And then the whole first arc of the first series is like the prelude to that, to explain, you know, if you think I'm a bad guy, you just don't understand what life's like down here. It's complicated. It's basically the entire fucking setup. And it's amazing propaganda, because if anyone, like if you do like the slightest bit of scrutiny into the activities of a Drug Enforcement Administration, you will quickly discover that they are in fact fucking stone cold villains, right? They are not good people. They, especially in South America in the 80s onwards, got up to some horrendous shit. Straight up including, you know, associations with paramilitary death squads and, like, you know, all this kind of shit. Just absolutely vile stuff. So how then do you do a show, right, about the fucking narcotics traffickers, the drug kingpins, from the perspective of DEA agents without, you know, showing just all that bad shit? And what they do is, again, it's not so much about trying to hide how horrible things were as provide context to make it understandable and to make it complicated, you know? Yeah. Right?
I feel like that kind of almost backfired in Narco's case, because I remember watching it and thinking, man, this Pablo Escobar guy, he's got a bit of a point. He seems like a bit of an anti-imperialist king, you know?
Yeah, right. See, that's one of the things I like about it, and you start to get to the end of the series, I'm like, this is starting to get a bit depressing now by the end of season 2, when you're heading towards Pablo Escobar. Spoilers, Pablo Escobar died, right? I think that's
what?
Should
what?
F's in the chat.
Right? Yeah, right. But, like, I've partly that worked because the guy who played Pablo Escobar is extremely good and very charismatic in how he carries himself. But also just like, it did backfire a little bit, but it also kind of got people going, well, I mean, see how violent and awful these guys are. I guess, you know, the whole thing was just a clusterfuck. And that's what the propaganda value of it is. It's just to get people to write the whole thing off and go, oh, what the fuck did we learn, Palmer? You know, and just kind of memory hole it in that kind of way. And that to me is a thing that whenever they can't avoid talking about the horrible shit that cops and cop adjacent people get up to, their primary tactic is to go, well, it's complicated, everyone was bad, and yes, we did bad things, but things have kind of got a bit better since then, which is why these dramas are always, one of the reasons, okay, the other one's libel, not that that's ever stopped us, but one of the reasons that these are all historical dramas, essentially, is so that they've got a bit of distance and a bit of time, and there's like the impression that things have moved on, and they use that rhetorically a lot, because another thing Narcos does is it has like the voiceover from a DEA agent, right? And it's always like back in, and you think you need to understand about back then, and it's always like implicit within that rhetoric is the idea that things have changed, that's back then, but we're in now, but we never actually talk about now, never actually explain, well, this shit is just going on in a slightly different way. And whenever they do talk about it, it's always like it's complicated, don't worry about it, you have to play with the lesser of two evils sort of thing, and look at the cost on the men who are involved in doing this, it's fucking up their marriages and stuff. And that is an explicitly cop trope, isn't it? The whole, he's doing difficult, dangerous work and look at the toll it's having on his personal life because his wife is, divorcing him. You were saying earlier, Jamie, the cop who's got like 6 different divorces, under his belt is like a trope sort of thing. And it's never explicitly like, well, they divorced him because it's a shit life, and the guy is, the cops typically are racist, sexist, and have a higher domestic violence rates than the entire rest of the population. Like, they never bring up that fact, right? That 40%, I believe it is, of cops beat their wives. Yeah. That shit's never touched on. Instead, it's just it's just another source of stress. It's people not understanding.
It's the stress. It's the stress of the job and the effect it has on them, and also constantly being kidnapped by terrorists and drug lords. They're the number one reasons why like cop's wife leaves him. It's never like, oh, he left like too many guns, like with towels, like tea towels jammed in the firing mechanism, lying around the house. Do you know what I mean?
And it's never his fault. It's always it's never that he's abusive or anything like that. It's always just that he's emotionally distant or something like that. And the wife's just asking too much from him, and that's why the marriage falls apart.
And it's like he's emotionally distant, but it's understandable. Really the problem is it's complicated, but the wife doesn't understand the context. Like, that's how it's always kind of put across.
Yeah, and but it's also like the sort of basic thing about like, are you married to the job or are you married to, your actual spouse, whatever the case may be.
You're entirely right, Rob. Because it always portrays it as though the spouses and their families are background to the police's lives. Like, it's always.
To be fair, if you're making a cop show, that is, what you do. Otherwise, you would make a housewife show or a family drama.
I mean,
you can make a family drama where the focus is the family, and one of them is just a cop.
No, I totally get that, but I mean, just in the way it's portrayed on the show, it's always an afterthought to the it's always portrayed as the thing the audience sees that the cops should care about is always the job. And whenever the family stuff is brought in, it's always brought in as a distraction to the job rather than a part of the cop's life, right? You could do a show that focuses on the life of a cop, right? And you could portray it in such a way that, the actual balance between their personal life and the job would be like an intrinsic part of it. But it's never portrayed like that. It's always portrayed that the job is their life. And whenever the family stuff intrudes in, it's always a distraction from it. And that's meant to engender sympathy for the cop whenever inevitably they hit the plot beat or their wife is leaving them or similar. The Shield does this and does it incredibly hard. The private life is just stuff to cause problems for the cop. It's never part of who the cop is or something that they are supposed to value in the actual framing of the text.
I think in this case of specifically and only of the Shield, because that's the reference I know the best, I would disagree with that. I think what it more shows in the case of the Shield is that being a cop is no good for your family life. For sure, but like specifically the way, and I'm assuming you're primarily referring to the main character's interactions with his family.
No, not just, but yeah, sure, we'll go with that.
But that it does show that, like, there's the original sin where they steal all the money, and everything that falls out from there and spirals out of control from there is them trying to keep control of the situation, and that has that impact on the family life. I don't think that necessarily that show in particular does what you say it does, which is the family is just ancillary and like sort of a negative side point rather than a main point. Specifically and only for the Shield.
Sometimes there needs to be a wife for the cop so that the wife can get kidnapped in the season finale.
Yeah,
yeah, that's true.
It's got to be.
Like, they are largely plot devices if they are utilised.
I think a very sort of like common reason why a cop's wife leaves him on TV is because she was murdered.
Well, yeah, they exist to be fridged in a sense. The cop version of fridging. But to answer your point, Rob, and say this constructively, what you just pointed is the stuff that happens from season 2 onwards. Season 1 of The Shield, literally the last episode of season 1 is the cop's wife's family getting threatened by the villain of the piece, sort of as David was describing, and that sets off like a whole bunch of drama, like it ends in her leaving him, sort of thing. So here's what we're saying, listener. Watch The Shield and see what you make of it, essentially. But I think the general point about the way families and the way, like, how families meant to be is handled in a lot of these cop shows stands, even if people might disagree on The Shield.
I think the TV cop with the absolute worst family is fucking what's his name from 24? Jack Bauer. Is it Jack Bauer?
Yeah.
How many
Jack Bauer.
times has his daughter been kidnapped?
Oh, like she's
I
like
think she's like 3 or 4 times in the first season.
yeah,
Right?
yeah, and like
I know there's a bit where she gets chased by a mountain lion.
that's the
after having
second season.
escaped a second.
That's the
kidnap
second
or
season
third
where
kidnap.
Kevin Dillon like finds her in the woods and like tries to make her his like post-apocalyptic bride or some shit. When the nuke goes off, it's just she's basically like like Penelope Pitstop for the modern age. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
She just exists to just be fucking kidnapped and like terrorized.
And tied to train tracks by a mustachioed villain.
I mean, like if 24 goes on long enough, I imagine that will happen. Like, yeah, it's
Yeah,
just,
there's something going on with one of the writers. there,
yeah,
I feel.
oh, absolutely.
You
Like,
should check his DeviantArt or his hard drive.
Jesus.
yeah, just at the back of the writers' rooms, Quentin Tarantino and a fake mustache.
Yeah, but I mean, 24 is really one of those cases. I think is that still a cop drama? I think in the first couple seasons it is before it goes completely off the rails. I
The
think
thing
it counts.
you have to remember is that the cop show format is so easily utilised that it's pretty much universal and is used even for things that have nothing to do with the police. Like if you look at a show like House, for instance, that's
Yeah.
pretty much just a cop show where they do medical drama.
Yeah, very explicitly when they were setting it up, they said we want to do a cop show where the villain is the disease, essentially, and the investigation is trying to prove the disease did it, essentially, from all the different suspects.
House is very similar to like Quincy, in that like every episode is exactly the fucking same. You can't binge watch House. Like we try to like when we're looking for stuff to watch with my mum in lockdown, I was like, oh, we could watch House, and we watched like 3 episodes, and I was like, nah, this isn't gonna fucking work. Do you know what I mean? You can tolerate House if there's a week between each episode, but if you're watching like two back to back, it's like, wait, what? This is just exactly the same fucking plot twice. Do you know what I mean? It's just like that for like 20 odd episodes a season.
Yeah, it's like they need to vary it up for it to actually hold its like integrity, and for this reason, and by integrity I mean like to hold together as like a conceptual thing you can enjoy. And for this reason, I think the apotheosis of cop shows isn't even about police officers. It's NCIS, about the Navy kind of police sort of thing, where it's actually an agency and fucking final like mentioners about it.
The only bit of NCIS I've ever seen is the fucking 2 like people on one keyboard. When they're being hacked, that is like just. I refuse to watch anything else. That is the whole show, as far as I'm concerned. It's fucking
That is so dumb.
It's just incredible. And then like the boomer comes in and just unplugs the computer to save them. It's fucking. It's just absolutely chef's kiss. That like it's beautiful.
Oh no, it is a supremely crafted, like well-honed, well-oiled machine of propaganda, because it rips up all of the existing cop shows and takes the best bits from each of them. So you've got your NCIS bit, which is the goth girl in the lab, right? And that's going over the evidence in particular detail. You've got your hard-boiled cop who, is from a troubled military past sort of thing, but still has honour at heart and has trouble with his ex-wives and shit. And that's like the lead. You've got your playboy, doesn't quite play by the rules, but is the leading man kind of guy, who's one of them. Then you've got your nerd who's gradually hardening the fuck up as the series goes on. That's one of them. And then in season 1, they had like the woman cop and her struggles with sexism, but they quickly fucking murder her, right, and replace her with a Mossad agent who is there on exchange by agreement with the Israeli government. I am not making this shit up. And there's a whole plot about them tracking down her brother, who is an agent for not Palestine, and about his terrorist activities, right? It is on a whole other fucking level in terms of just like, you inject this shit into boomers' eyeballs and it works. It is the creme brulee of copganda and propaganda, because it even works in the international Israel is our ally kind of element. And it also does it's complicated when talking about Israel. Israel. It genuinely, every single plot point and beat we've talked about here finds its presence in NCIS as a honed machine of convincing people the cops are good.
The other thing that sticks in my mind about NCIS is that it's got the kind of horrible, snappy, sub-Whedon kind of dialogue going on. It's horrible. It's worse than Bones for that, and Bones is another cop show that we should probably talk about because that's fucking awful as well.
So I've not seen Bones, but I've heard terrible things.
My mum loves Bones, so I imagine it's dreadful. But yeah, like I got charged for like an entire season of Bones on Amazon Prime because like I left my mum's Fire Stick logged into my Amazon account, and she went
schoolboy
and like
Jamie.
the first like 10 seasons were on Prime, and then the last season wasn't, and she just like powered through and just fucking watched it all, and like
oh Jesus.
And like Amazon Prime absolutely rip you the fuck off if you're buying a TV show off them. Like, yeah,
oh, they absolutely do. I actually really fucking hate them. Its Prime Originals are bust for that.
We went to rewatch Justified, like because my daughter hadn't seen it a few years back, and
so she's still ahead of the curve compared to David, right?
And it wasn't on Prime at that point. But the first season was like £5 for the whole season on Amazon, and I was like,
which is not.
I was like, oh, that's good. I'll grab that. So we watched that, and it was like, yeah, it was great. She loved it. We're gonna carry on. We went to the second season, and it was like £20 for the season, and I was like, are you fucking taking the piss? Do you know what I mean? And the individual episodes were like £4 or £5 each, and I went and looked on Amazon and got a box set of the entire season on DVD for like £7, and it's like, how do you know what I mean? It's just baffling that they charge. Like, it's like three. You can buy the entire season in like a physical copy, or you can have one season for 3 times as much. Like which way, Western man? Do you know what I mean? It was just
I choose the third way. Yo-ho fiddle-dee-dee. Being a pirate is all right for me. I strongly recommend people do not pay fucking Amazon or similar for this kind of rip-off shit and just pirate this stuff, especially for the older shows.
It's on Prime now anyway, so like you should
all
watch.
Right, well, there you go,
should
David.
watch Justified. But again,
I told you I'm on the 3rd fucking season. Leave me alone.
Yeah, but in this,
we're just going to bully you until you shape up, man.
That's every other member of the podcast has watched like all 6 seasons in the time it took you to get through 2.
Listen, I've got a lot on, right? Leave me alone.
If you spent less time on the goof pills.
Oh, right. I'm going to posit something here, and I'm going to ask: is it propaganda?
Right.
Okay.
Hot Fuzz.
Yes, but.
Yes, but. I was waiting for the but. Yeah.
So, Hot Fuzz is propaganda in that fundamentally it portrays the existence of the police in a fun, upbeat, friendly association creating kind of way that is completely and utterly divorced and disconnected from the reality of how the police are.
Mm-hmm.
But it does this as a self-aware satirical homage to action movies which run on the formula uncritically and unaware, right? So in this way, I think it gets a pass for knowing what it's about, but like with all media, you have to consume it with the right mindset going in, which is that this is complete and utter fantasy and has no bearing or reality to the actual society that it describes, which is the key difference. Like, you watch Hot Fuzz, it is very clearly an action film homage, and it lampshades it in the actual in the progress of the film at multiple points, and you're like, you can't watch that and think it's anything else, though I'm sure there's some fucking idiot out there who has. Compare and contrast that.
I find the idea of like some
420.
I find the idea of like some psychotic English or white village like slaughtering people who don't put the bins out on time not entirely out of the realm of plausibility.
We're less than a decade away from that happening.
That is the final form of the English dream.
Yeah, absolutely. Like
it is. But to compare and contrast, like Hot Fuzz, you go in, you know what you're getting. Even the name is a huge clue, right? Whereas you compare it to shows like NCIS or Brooklyn Nine-Nine, etc. Even Brooklyn Nine-Nine is less self-aware about what it's doing and what it is than Hot Fuzz. And so that's the difference. Propaganda is effective when it is not identified by its recipient as being propaganda. It's just like good propaganda is just received facts by people. You know, that's when propaganda is most effective, because this is why Soviet propaganda failed, because it was very in your face and very like, citizen, it is important that you believe kind of stuff. Whereas Western propaganda, its successes have always been just presenting shit to people and framing it in such a way that they draw the correct inference from this, and they don't look behind the curtain to see how it's actually working and what its assumptions are. And often stuff that's incidental.
I'm not gonna stand to slagging off the people that gave us the Yuri Gagarin in space with "There is no God" written above it. Stuff like that's not happening.
I think, right, okay, so here's the thing. That's just excellent, and I don't see how you can say statements of fact or propaganda, David. I don't get that. Listener, I hope you see what I did there. Please don't have a tedious exchange with me on Twitter about it.
Have all the tedious exchanges with James that you want on Twitter. They love that shit.
Yeah, my handle is at CopRespector420.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, no.
Can I just before we move off Hot Fuzz, can I just say as well, it's half an hour too long. Like all
I'm not sure
all the action stuff at the end is fucking dog shit. It's like something Robert Rodriguez would direct. It's just so bad. And also it's baffling to me that they have so little faith in their reference to the thing where Keanu Reeves jumps out of a plane. What's that called? Point Break.
Point Break.
Yeah.
Point Break.
They want to reference like Point Break at the end of that film, but they just assume incorrectly that literally they're the only two people in like the UK who have even heard of Point Break, and so have like three like preamble do you know what I mean? Straight up gets asked if he's ever fired a gun in the air while screaming, like in Point Break, and then they show you the scene from Point Break where Keanu fires the gun up in the air screaming, and then they reference it at the end, and it's like, what the fuck is this, man? Do you know what I mean? It's
that's what's known in the trade as foreshadowing, Jamie.
It is absolutely clunky as fuck, like.
I think so. I'm going to disagree with you here, Jamie, and I'm going to give you a compliment when I say it. I think you are a better critic and connoisseur of these things than your average cinema goer at the time Hot Fuzz was released. And in their defense, it was also like their second big movie. So, like, they get a fair bit of credit. I think it's intentionally a little bit naff in the action sequence at the end, in a kind of like a very British self-aware way that I can't quite articulate. So I'm going to disagree with you.
Yeah, but it just goes on. It goes on far too long. If that's the case, do you know what I mean? It's like if you're gonna go, we did the action, but the action's kind of shit because it's British. That's fine, but like, don't do so much of it. Then, do you know what I mean? It just goes on and on. It's like people just firing guns at like nothing. Do you know what I mean? There's no like.
Okay. Release the Jamie cut is what we're saying.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. I was trying to think, like, is there a good video game angle on propaganda? And I was kind of struggling. The only game that I can think of about cops at all right now still is Disco Elysium, but that's like effectively not cops.
What about something like LA Noire?
Yeah. God, I fucking hated LA Noire.
It's bad, and it's a period piece, which if it's such a distant period piece, it makes it hard to contextualize in the same way for this modern stuff.
It's the thing about LA Noire is it like draws so heavily on like stuff like James Ellroy, but with like none of what makes him good.
Yes, 100% yes.
Yeah, I might have gotten on with that had it not been like partially GTA as well. It didn't need to be an open world game. I played about half an hour of that and then like fucking yeeted the disc into a hedge or something. It was just like the first case there's been some sort of crime involving a car from an embassy, and like you go there, and I'm looking at this like car, and you can clearly see one of the little flags on the wing of the car has snapped off, and I've got the fucking like Gadgie, the detective, just like humping the fucking car, and it will not give me a prompt to interact and go, oh, that flag's broken off there, and I'm like, right, okay, fuck it. Clearly he's not going to look at that. It's not important. And then we go to interview a suspect, like someone's mother or something, and the fucking broken off flag is in the ashtray, and you can't talk about it because you didn't get the prompt of the car. And I'm like, right, we get back in the fucking car, and we're trying to drive back to the like original crime scene, but like because it's like open world, you've got to like navigate there on your own, and we end up in a tunnel under the crime scene, and I just lost my rag, and I was like, no, this is fucking, I've had enough of this shit. You know what I mean?
Like, Jamie doesn't enjoy being a cop is not the biggest surprise I've ever heard. But, no, it's not a great game. It's certainly one you want to watch someone competently play through it if you want to have the experience of it, and that's it. It's preferable to playing it. I'm genuinely convinced that was a tech experiment for Rockstar developing future stuff for GTA.
Yeah, I was going to say that like the biggest problem with that was that it essentially was a technology suite looking for a game rather than a game that had some technology, because the whole thing is about that facial capture and stuff. But then like they also assume that the audience are fucking and the players are fucking morons. So like every like facial expression of like anger or fear is like, you know, the eyeballs just sort of roll up into the sky, and you know the eyebrows disappear down into somebody's chin, and it's like, oh, they're sad. Okay. You know, like there's no subtlety to it whatsoever because they assume that the audience are morons.
I think
I honestly,
if we're talking about cop games,
turning a dial that says facial expressions back and forth and looking back at the audience.
Yeah, if we're talking about cop games, the SWAT games.
Oh yes.
They are so like in such a weird place because they were great to play. But obviously, the idea that like the sort of the fantasy of like, oh, you're like just kicking someone's like house to bits while you like shoot them or whatever because you think they've done meth once is fucking atrocious. But the actual like moment to moment gameplay of like clearing the rooms and everything is very satisfying in that sort of middle aged man way. You know what I mean? It's the same sort. It's a Tom Clancy thing, isn't it? Where you like. Do you know what I mean? Like Rainbow Six is basically the same thing, but with like terrorists instead of like meth labs or whatever.
Yeah, and like the much like Rainbow Six, the first Rainbow Six was very kind of measured and tactical, and it was all very about like planning and execution.
And now they're fighting
cool.
aliens.
But like now they're literally fighting aliens, according to E3. Thanks, Ubisoft. Tom Clancy is totally on board with that.
Do you know what I mean?
It might be good just because they kind of... I honestly think what happened is they were going to release a mobile game, which the director or whoever on it, the lead creative head honcho, was like the son of some guy at Ubisoft. Like, not even joking. He was my big fail son from some Ubisoft bigwig. And so they were producing this game, which was about...
Oh, is this the one where the villains were like Black Lives Matter, but they didn't call them Black Lives Matter?
Oh,
the street protests in the US, Black Lives Matter, except these crowds are being stirred up by a sinister organization in the background called Umbra. And it's like, Umbra, Umbral, of the night. Wonder how they got to... Wonder what the connecting factor is here. Wonder what the inspiration was for this particular organization.
They straight up had the Black Lives Matter logo, though, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. They had... Well, it's not really Black Lives Matter exactly, but they've used it, and it's the upturned fist, and... upraised fist, I should say, sorry. And, like, so they caught a bunch of shit for that, and I think going with aliens is them trying to
aliens,
themselves.
It can't be political.
I honestly think they've just had so much shit over their stupid lack of politics or their bad politics. Because, I mean, Far Cry... 5 had the same problem because it was like set in America about a weird religious cult, and I was like super excited going, oh, maybe they're actually gonna have fun with this, and it's garbage, don't play it. But one of the reasons it's garbage is they're very careful to make sure the cult is multiracial and accepting of others and stuff like that, but they're still an evil, wicked cult rather than actually going for the very historically, incepted reality of weird Christian cults. We also don't make them a Christian cult either. Like they won't fucking commit. They won't actually, so you can't really have fun with something if it's trying to ape the real world but not ape it. And it's trying to ape the real world but not be political. So what's the solution to that? Aliens.
Yeah, I mean, it might be good though, because like presumably if it involves aliens, then it's going to be like co-op play a lot rather than, because Rainbow Six Siege is quite a good game, but like if what you want is to like methodically, like, do you know what I mean? Like do the whole sort of like tactical fucking fantasy thing and just methodically clear a room, like, room by room until you've saved the president or whatever. And then like Rainbow Six Siege is like, oh no, you've got to play it against like fucking teenagers on the internet and they're all just going to fucking kill you instantly. And then call you a slur. Do you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, grand.
Yeah.
So maybe aliens.
Well, that's much closer to the actual cops who will just like shoot you in the head for no reason.
Oh man.
Oh, right. Okay. So I think, James, you said that you had a couple of examples of fairly accurate depictions of the cops.
Well, sort of. I've got 1.5 example, and the half example is something I've already mentioned, which is The Wire. The Wire is pretty good when it comes to depicting the war on drugs and how America has responded to it and how the police kind of live under the reality of it. Back in the day, things have devolved since then. It's now out of date, basically. But that side of it, they're fairly unflinching about, and it's not a bad depiction because it shows how, obsession with stats and numbers driven by the war on drugs and the ability to fundamentally to prove that you are doing a good job fighting a battle which cannot be won, right, has led to the police force just being complete garbage and made them into thugs, essentially. That's like a major through line in The Wire, which includes like an older cop sitting down a younger cop and telling him he's a shit cop and it's not his fault. It's because he's come up under the war on drugs, essentially. So that's like pretty good. And again, The Wire is good. It's a good show. It's got interesting characters. It's got cool drama. It takes a few episodes to kind of get it, but once it kicks in, I find it quite good and it's worth a watch. The other show, you can't get anymore. I've mentioned this before in passing. I don't know if I mentioned it on the pod, but there was a British TV show called The Cops, right? And it was a very unflinching look at what life is like for actual cops. And for season 1, they had very close cooperation with the police federation. And they had consultancy from actual cops who were on the beat, etc. And to give you an idea of how it begins with a young woman partying all night, taking ecstasy and shit, and doing, various kinds of illegal activities. And then she's getting out of the club and looking at her watch going, oh shit, I need to get to work. And smash cut to, she walks into the locker room and she's a cop. Right? So, already it's setting up that this is going to be a look at how the cops actually are. And it involves all the horrible shit practices that you would expect to hear about the cops, including 2 cops are chasing a guy and the older cop has a heart attack and ends up in the hospital. And the other cop, his seasonal arc is fitting up the guy who ran away and gave his partner a heart attack for no other reason than he gave his partner a heart attack by running away. And so it's got shit like that. But it also has stuff like the cops responding to suicide, threats and all this kind of stuff. And it's interesting. It's genuinely nuanced. It shows the cops to be the total bastards that they are, but also shows it actually does a pretty decent job of showing how someone could do this job and not be a complete and utter bastard, but made to behave as a bastard by the fact they're doing that job, right? Surprise, surprise, all seasons after season 1 got no further cooperation with Police Federation. And it has fucking sunk below the lake. It is impossible to find. I had to send away to a dodgy guy based somewhere in Tel Aviv to send me burnt DVDs of it to be able to watch it. You can't even get it on fucking LimeWire equivalents or any BitTorrent sites. It doesn't. I have not been able to find it. I only was able to find it by going on eBay essentially and finding a guy running a very dodgy store through there. And get the disc sent across.
Are you telling me they've done some kind of Operation Legacy on this show? They've just dumped it into the ocean.
I honestly feels like it's been memory hold because it's a good show, by the way. I enjoyed it. Especially like it's got good drama, and it's also a fairly realistic portrayal of the police and how fucked up they are. And it's just gone. Like, it's available. It was available for purchase on VHS on Amazon. That gives you an idea of like how niche it was. But there was never a DVD release of it. And I believe it was BBC, if I recall correctly. Let me look it up real quick, actually, and we'll
see. I think really the reason that this show never really kind of stuck around is because from the very start your immersion is completely broken by the idea that a cop would be able to successfully purchase drugs to enjoy.
It was originally aired on BBC Two in 1998 to 2001, right? So it's kind of old, but they received a single rerun on UK TV drama in the early 2000s, and that's it. It vanished without a trace, essentially. And it's the only cop show I've looked at where I've been like, well, this is a fairly accurate portrayal.
Well,
and that's it. All the others,
how dare you?
Because
are you suggesting that something like Linda LaPlante's Killer Net is unrealistic?
Fuck's sake!
I don't even know I don't even think that qualifies as a cop show. I just felt obligated to bring it up. Every
cultural committee.
Every cop show does eventually do Linda LaPlante's Killer Net, though. Like, you know what I mean? As far as it's like a rule that eventually you have to do a thing where someone is using the internet to do murders. And like, there's the live streaming the murder, and everyone's watching it. Oh my god! Do you know what I mean? It's like, all right.
Does that mean that Black Mirror episode with the killer bees is technically a cop show?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's technically a cop show, but it's definitely Linda LaPlante's Killer Net. Yeah.
So I've got a question. Is a touch of cloth personally? Is that like provisionally a cop show?
Yes.
Oh,
yes, I think so.
Yeah. Fuck, it's been long since I've seen that.
In the same way that like Police Squad is a cop show.
Yeah. Yeah. Police Squad is definitely a cop show. I don't know if it's propaganda though.
Well, that's a question, isn't it? I'm actually really impressed that me and David have been able to get through this entire episode without talking about Taggart.
I've never seen an episode of Taggart, and I'm keeping it that way.
Oh, you're missing a core part of your heritage, I'm afraid.
No, so I'm fucking told by every English bastard I want to say.
Yeah, this segment is for our friends in Glasgow and Scotland more broadly.
Enjoy it. Literally all I remember about Taggart is that it was on telly once, and one of the cops was the roommate that they like absolutely fuck off in Shallow Grave. You know, at the start where they're like the ginger lad's there, and he's like dead excited to live with them, and they just go like, "Why would we want to live with you?" And they all laugh at him, and like that guy turned up as a cop in Taggart, and I'd literally just watched Shallow Grave, and then like a couple of days later, my mum was watching Taggart, and I was like, "Oh, I've never seen that guy before." You know, back in the days before IMDb solved that problem forever. I think I was on my way out of the house for a night out, and I just spent the whole night in the fucking club, just sat there like just trying to remember where I'd seen that fucking prick from Taggart before. Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, all right. So everything's propaganda, effectively, I think, is what we've established.
Aye. See.
Well, actually, okay.
I want to do like an honourable mention to the one cop show that I think is sort of all right, which is Ironside.
Okay, I've heard interesting things about it, but I've not seen it.
I'm talking about the original '60s Ironside with Perry Mason in it. Not the reboot, which I haven't watched, but I did see it. I did see a trailer where Ironside was hanging a guy off a roof and threatening to drop him if he didn't confess, which is just so far away from like my understanding of what Ironside is meant to be that it was hilarious.
All right, well, thank fucking God, because that remake I didn't know there was an original. So when you mentioned it there, I was like, okay, yeah, let's see where JB's going with this.
No, so the original, the guy's like in a wheelchair because he was shot by a sniper or something, and he had to he's now a consultant for the police rather than an actual cop.
That's a whole weird genre we haven't even touched on, because that's also Sherlock.
Yeah. Well, he's a
consulting
consultant. He's a
business.
consultant for the cops in San Francisco. And he has like an ex-con as he's like personal helper, because he obviously needs help to get in and out of his like loft in San Francisco or whatever. But his whole thing is that he's like focused entirely on like helping criminals. Do you know what I mean? Like rehabilitate and everything. And that's he's trying like I mean obviously I haven't watched the whole thing, and I've only I haven't seen it in a while, but from like what I remember of episodes that I just saw on the telly when it was on, is that his whole thing is that like the cops should try not to like drive people down the road to more crime. They should try and like be sensitive, and like people can change if you help them and stuff like that. And so his thing was it was always like, oh, the cops are after this guy who'd like done time, and they're convinced like a crime's been done, and it must be that guy because he just got out of jail, and he would like sort of like track the guy down and prove that it wasn't him, and that the cops were like being too shit about it, which is like.
So you're telling me that the main purpose of this guy was to get people away from the cool world of doing crimes and into the world of working minimum wage at Burger King or something?
Yeah, well,
he sounds square as hell.
It was the 60s, but like his whole thing was that like justice should be rehabilitative rather than punitive, which is, I'm going to say a fairly unique take for what was ostensibly a cop show.
Certainly in this point, yeah.
I actually, you know what, Jamie, you just sold something, because I was going to suggest that it might be a good idea to finish by giving a working definition of how to tell something is propaganda. And maybe it's that. Maybe it's fundamentally it comes from a premise, it comes from a position that justice must be done in a retributive fashion, and that this is okay and good actually, for a variety of different reasons. Maybe that is the definition of propaganda, because I can't think of a single show that doesn't fundamentally revolve on that premise out of all the ones we mentioned, including the light-hearted shit like Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Yeah, it's always like that. You should not trust people ever, and if you did a crime once, you'll always do a crime again. I remember the username that I've used online quite a bit. I'm not going to say I got it from a cop show, but I'd stayed up one night at about like 3 a.m. I'd seen some fucking I think it was Canadian, some absolutely fucking atrocious piece of shit cop show on Channel 4 or something in the middle of like the small hours of the morning. And there was a guy, and like this bloke had gotten out of prison. He'd been I think he'd been a pedo, and he'd gotten out of prison, and then a kid had gone missing. And this cop's like just straight round and like fucking like lift the guy. It must be him, but they've got no evidence or witnesses or anything. It's just this cop's like hunch, and he gets chewed out by his boss, and his boss is like, "Oh god damn it, you've got to like stop." And I couldn't remember like what the actual name of the cop was, so I made something stupid up when I was explaining, like when I was reciting how awful the show was to the wife. And then I ended up using that name online for like a decade or something at this point. But
it's very strange for a cop to be called Cop Prospector. But I suppose that's
because I've been using that for a decade. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Jamie never been banned from Twitter.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah, that's it. I'm new here this year. But it was like, the whole thing was like they've got no evidence and no reason to suspect this guy, but this cop just like the boss is like, God damn it, I told you to leave this case alone and you're off the case and all this shit. And then eventually like it turns out the guy did do it and the cop's hunch was right. And it's like, well, maybe then he should have fucking like gone and looked for some fucking evidence instead of just like, you know what I mean? Maybe he should have like actually solved the crime and then people would have believed him instead of just like fucking bulldozing in and going, must be him because my fucking hunch says so. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it just...
Yeah, I mean, honourable mention to the concept of the rap sheet in cop shows and how that gets leveraged to portray people as perma criminals, basically.
The best, I mean, it's from a very old podcast. I think it was run by Charlie Brooker at the time. Or no, it wasn't a podcast. I think it was even a TV show. Fuck knows what it was. It was years ago. But they were all trying to pitch concepts for a new cop series. And the best one that I thought came out of it was Brooker, who said, yeah, my new show is called The Reckoner. And it's just like cops walking into a room, pointing at a random person, going, "Yeah, I reckon it's him," and then that's the end of the episode.
Yeah, I mean,
the rest of a stitch up is just formality at that point.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. All right, then. Well, I think that's probably as good a place as any to leave this. So, first off, Ben, thanks very much for coming on, mate. Where can people find you doing what you do?
Oh God, you know my username on Twitter is an absolute mouthful, but it's participation. I won't go through the whole reason behind that. I'm also in participation on Twitch. I hope you'll put that in the show notes, because otherwise it's a bastard to spell. Great.
All right, and we've got Waifu Wednesdays to look forward to, don't we?
Yeah, it'll be tomorrow. Although I suppose it won't be when this is going out.
It'll have been yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah. So catch the VOD if it's still up. Yeah. To the listeners, we will catch you on Thursday unless you have subscribed to the Patreon for the bonus episode, which will be available this Tuesday coming.
Yes, it will be magic.
Look forward to that.
I've only got written 8 pages of show notes, so you bastards better appreciate it.
Yeah.
So, David, if we want our brains to be melted by Rob, where do we sign up for PraxisCast?
You will go to patreon.com/PraxisCast and you can subscribe to us there. You'll have access to that bonus episode when it is released on Tuesday. And it will have special guest Riley. So look forward to that.
That's Riley from Trash Future, yeah?
It is, yes. Riley from Trash Future.
Yeah. Yep. And buy some shirts. People
Also
haven't
buy
been
the
buying
shirts.
enough shirts lately.
Because
Citizen, the Central Planning Committee is dismayed at the lower than anticipated quota of shirt consumption. You must up your game, or we'll be forced to dissolve you and elect a new listenership.
teespring.com/stores/PraxisCast, and we will see you all when we see you. Cheerio.
Cheers.
Bye.
bye-bye.
Bye.